You have lived most of your life without ever stopping long enough to ask the most dangerous question a human being can ask. Not because the question is complicated, but because it is simple. Simple questions strip away excuses. Simple questions expose contradictions. And this question does not ask you what you have achieved, what you own, or how you are perceived. It asks something far more unsettling. Who are you? Not who you say you are when you introduce yourself. Not the version of you that functions in public. Not the collection of roles you perform so convincingly that even you have begun to believe them. Strip all of that away. Remove the name, the history, the expectations, the praise, the shame. When none of that is left, when no one is watching, approving, judging, or remembering you, who are you then? Most people never answer this. They sense the question, feel its weight, and immediately flee from it. They drown it in noise. They bury it under routine. They replace it with ambition, distraction, pleasure, validation. And from the outside, their lives appear full, productive, busy, successful, even. But inwardly, something remains unresolved, unexamined, quietly rotting. The Stoics understood this long before psychology gave it a name. They saw that a life not examined becomes a life lived on borrowed terms. Borrowed beliefs. Borrowed desires. Borrowed fears. A person like this does not live, they react. They move where pressure pushes them. They want what they are told is valuable. They fear what others fear. They suffer not because life is cruel, but because they have never taken ownership of themselves. Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by power, wealth, and endless opinion, still reminded himself daily that the greatest danger was not invasion, illness, or betrayal, but losing clarity about who he was meant to be. He wrote to himself not because he was uncertain of the world, but because he understood how easily the self dissolves when exposed to constant external influence. And you live under more influence in a single day than he did in a lifetime. From the moment you were young, you were taught, subtly, relentlessly, to look outward for answers. What is admired? What is rewarded? What is mocked? You learned quickly which parts of yourself earned approval and which parts caused friction. And without anyone ever saying it explicitly, you learned the most dangerous lesson of all, that belonging matters more than truth. So you adapted. You softened your edges. You adjusted your voice. You learned when to speak and when to stay silent, not out of wisdom, but out of fear. And each time you did this, it felt small, harmless, necessary. Just survival. Just fitting in. Just being realistic. But years of small betrayals do not remain small. They accumulate. They harden into habit. And eventually, you wake up one day with a life that feels strangely distant, as if you are watching yourself from the outside. This is the shadow life. Not dramatic. Not tragic in a visible way. Just quietly misaligned. Stoicism does not begin by telling you how to be happy. That is a modern obsession. Stoicism begins by asking whether you are free. And freedom, to the Stoic, has nothing to do with money, status, or choice overload. A person is free only to the extent that they are not ruled by fear, appetite, or opinion. An opinion, especially the opinion of others, is the most subtle tyrant of them all. You may think you are making your own decisions. But look closely. How many of them are shaped by the need to be seen a certain way? How many by the fear of disappointing, offending, standing out, or being misunderstood? How often do you ask, is this right, compared to, how will this look? Epictetus was blunt about this. If you want to know who controls you, look at what you are afraid to lose. For many people, it is not comfort or safety they fear losing most, it is approval. And when approval becomes currency, the self becomes negotiable. This is why you feel restless even when things are fine. Why achievements feel underwhelming. Why praise fades quickly. You are feeding something external while starving something essential. The Stoics would say you have confused your nature with your image. An image is never stable. It depends on moods, crowds, trends, and timing, none of which you control. So you live in a state of quiet tension. Part of you senses that you are capable of more integrity, more depth, more inner order. Another part clings to familiarity, even when familiarity suffocates you. This tension is exhausting. And because it has lasted so long, you mistake exhaustion for normality. But it is not normal to feel disconnected from yourself. It is common, but not normal. The Stoics believe that every human being is born with a capacity for reason, not intelligence, not cleverness, but the ability to discern what is within their control and what is not. An identity, properly understood, belongs entirely within your control. Not how others see you. Not what happens to you. But how you choose to think, judge, and act. You have likely spent years trying to control outcomes instead. Success. Recognition. Acceptance. And every time those slip, as they inevitably do, you suffer. Not because the loss itself is unbearable, but because your sense of self was attached to it. This is why Stoicism insists on separating who you are from what you experience. You are not your failures. You are not your past decisions. You are not your reputation. These are events, impressions, narratives, not your essence. The essence is how you respond. The character you practice when no reward is guaranteed. Seneca warned that most people are strangers to themselves. They know what they want next week, but not what they stand for. They can explain their goals, but not their principles. And without principles, a person becomes endlessly adjustable. Flexible, yes, but hollow. To discover who you are is not to invent an identity. It is to remove everything that is not you. Every borrowed desire. Every fear that came from someone else's expectations. Every role you mistook for your nature. This is not a loud process. There is no announcement. No transformation montage. Just a gradual return to internal alignment. And alignment is uncomfortable at first. Because the moment you stop living by external approval, friction appears. People resist the version of you that no longer performs. Some feel threatened. Some feel confused. Some attempt to pull you back into the version they recognize. This is why so many people abandon self-discovery halfway through. The cost feels too high. But the Stoics would say the cost of not doing it is higher. To live without knowing who you are is to be permanently vulnerable. Any insult can destabilize you. Any loss can shatter you. Any comparison can poison your peace. You become reactive, defensive, restless, always adjusting, never grounded. The Stoic self is not rigid. It is rooted. It bends without breaking because it knows what it stands on. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that he could leave life at any moment, and that this awareness should inform every word, every action, every thought. Not to create anxiety, but clarity. When time is finite, pretending becomes absurd. Performing becomes wasteful. Living in accordance with reason becomes urgent. Ask yourself, honestly, how much of your life is lived on autopilot? How much is guided by habit rather than choice? How often you act not because something is right, but because it is expected. This is not an accusation. It is an invitation. The Stoics did not believe in self-hatred. They believed in self-responsibility. You are not condemned for having lived unconsciously, but you are responsible for continuing to do so once you see it. To know who you are is to reclaim authority over your inner life. To stop arguing with reality. To stop outsourcing meaning. To stop waiting for permission to be yourself. And this process does not begin with grand declarations. It begins with attention. Watching your reactions. Observing your judgments. Noticing when you betray your values for comfort. Not with guilt, but with precision. Because clarity precedes change. And the moment you begin to see yourself clearly, the shadow starts to dissolve. When you begin to observe yourself honestly, something subtle but profound happens. You realize that much of what you thought was you is simply repetition. Learned responses. Inherited beliefs. Emotional reflexes installed long before you had the strength to question them. The Stoics were not surprised by this. They understood that most suffering is not caused by events, but by unexamined judgments passed down unconsciously and obeyed automatically. You were taught what success looks like before you were taught how to think. You were rewarded for fitting in before you were encouraged to stand firm. And slowly, almost invisibly, your internal compass was replaced by external signals. Praise became direction. Criticism became danger. Silence became safety. This is how a person loses themselves without ever noticing a dramatic moment of loss. Epictetus said that people are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them. Extend this further, and you see the deeper problem. People are not disturbed because they don't know how to act, they are disturbed because they don't know who they are acting as. Without a stable inner identity, every situation becomes a negotiation. Every choice becomes conditional. Every stance is temporary. So you hesitate. You overthink. You replay conversations in your head. You imagine alternate versions of yourself, braver, calmer, firmer, and wonder why you couldn't access that version when it mattered. The answer is not confidence. It is coherence. You cannot act decisively when you are divided internally. Stoicism aims to unify the self. Not by inflating ego, but by aligning thought, value, and action. When these three agree, a person becomes difficult to disturb. Not because they suppress emotion, but because they are no longer at war with themselves. Ask yourself this: how often do you do things you do not respect yourself for? Not because they are immoral, but because they are evasive. Because they avoid discomfort. Because they protect image at the expense of integrity. Each time you do this, something inside you notices. It may not shout. It may not even speak. But it records. This is why self-respect erodes quietly. Not through catastrophic failure, but through 1,000 small concessions. And once self-respect weakens, you begin to seek substitutes. Validation. Achievement. Attention. Control. These feel like strength, but they are compensation. Seneca warned that no man is free who is a slave to his body or his reputation. Today, reputation has multiplied. It is no longer just the opinion of your village, but of an abstract crowd you will never meet. And yet, its influence reaches into your decisions, your expression, even your silence. You begin to curate yourself rather than cultivate yourself. But Stoicism asks you to reverse this process. Instead of asking, "How am I seen?" it asks, "How am I governed?" Instead of asking, "What will this get me?" it asks, what does this make me? These questions are uncomfortable because they remove excuses. They force responsibility inward. And responsibility is heavy when you have avoided it for a long time. To discover who you are, you must first accept that much of what you have been doing is not aligned with your deeper values. This does not mean you are weak. It means you are human. The Stoics did not shame people for this. They expected it. What they demanded was correction, not through punishment, but through discipline. Discipline, in Stoic terms, is not harshness. It is consistency with reason. It is the refusal to abandon your principles when it becomes inconvenient. It is choosing the long-term integrity of the self over the short-term relief of avoidance. And this is where most people turn away. Because once you begin to live in alignment with who you are, not who you are rewarded for being, friction increases. You may lose approval. You may disappoint others. You may feel exposed. But what you gain is something far rarer, internal steadiness. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that he was made for cooperation, not applause. For justice, not comfort. For truth, not convenience. And he returned to this again and again because the world constantly pulls you away from it. You live in a world that profits from your confusion, from your dissatisfaction, from your constant striving to become something else. A person who knows who they are is difficult to manipulate. They are less reactive, less impulsive, less dependent. This is why self-knowledge has always been quietly discouraged. When you do not know who you are, others will define you. When you do not choose your values, you will absorb them. When you do not govern your mind, it will be governed for you. Stoicism is not about withdrawing from life. It is about entering it as a whole person rather than a fragmented one. The Stoic does not reject ambition, they refine it. They do not reject emotion, they examine it. They do not reject society, they refuse to be dissolved by it. So what does it mean, practically, to begin discovering who you are? It begins with attention to judgment. Every time something happens, notice the story you tell yourself about it. Not the event, the interpretation. Is it rooted in reason or fear? In principle or habit? In truth or protection of ego? You will notice patterns. Certain situations trigger defensiveness. Certain people trigger compliance. Certain outcomes trigger self-doubt. These are not random. They point directly to the parts of you that have not yet been examined. The Stoics believe that the mind must be trained like a muscle. Not through force, but through repetition. Each day is an opportunity to practice seeing clearly. Each mistake is feedback, not condemnation. Each moment of discomfort is a signal, not a threat. But this only works if you are honest. And honesty is the hardest discipline of all. Because honesty forces you to admit that some of your suffering is self-created. That some of your unhappiness is maintained because it is familiar. That some of your constraints exist only because you have never questioned them. This is not meant to shame you. It is meant to free you. Once you accept responsibility for your inner life, you reclaim power over it. Not total control, Stoics never promised that, but authorship. You become the one who decides what matters, what doesn't, and why. And slowly, something shifts. You stop needing to win every argument. You stop explaining yourself excessively. You stop chasing reactions. You stop shrinking to maintain peace. Not because you are detached or indifferent, but because you are anchored. Anchored in character. At this stage, people may say you've changed. They are not wrong. You have. But what they are really sensing is not change, it is consistency. You are no longer adjustable to every external pressure. You are less available for manipulation, less reactive to disrespect, less shaken by uncertainty. This is not arrogance. It is orientation. The Stoics believe that the highest good is living in accordance with nature, and human nature, at its best, is rational, social, and principled. When you violate your nature repeatedly, you feel it as anxiety, emptiness, resentment. When you align with it, you feel something quieter but deeper, calm. Not excitement. Not pleasure. Calm. Calm is the signal of alignment. And alignment is what most people mistake for confidence. You do not need to become louder, tougher, or more impressive to discover who you are. You need to become more precise, more deliberate, more internally honest. Who are you when no one is watching? Who are you when there is no reward? Who are you when fear suggests compromise? Answering these questions is not a one-time event. It is a lifelong practice. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself until the end of his life because clarity is not permanent, it must be maintained. But once you begin, truly begin, you cannot unsee it. You will start noticing where you abandon yourself, where you trade truth for ease, where you act against your own judgment. And each time you notice, you have a choice. To return. Not to perfection, to alignment. And now you arrive at the end of this reflection. Not as someone who needs to be repaired. Not as someone waiting to be rescued. But as someone who needs to be remembered. Remembered by yourself. Because long before the world told you who to be. Long before approval became currency. Long before fear began editing your thoughts and dulling your instincts. You already existed. Clear. Whole. Enough. Remember who you were before you learned to ask permission to speak. Before you measured your worth by reactions. Before you traded truth for comfort. And comfort for silence. The Stoics understood something most people never confront. The greatest tragedy is not pain. It is not loss. It is not hardship. The greatest tragedy is living without awareness. To exist without ever truly examining who you are. Why you act the way you do. And what you are surrendering each day without realizing it. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are not weak. You were distracted. Distracted by noise. Distracted by expectations. Distracted by a world that rewards performance over presence. And distraction ends the moment you choose to live deliberately. Not emotionally. Not impulsively. But intentionally. From this point forward, let your actions speak more than explanations. You do not owe clarity to those committed to misunderstanding you. You do not owe access to those who treat your attention casually. Let your calm replace your anger. Because anger hands control to others. Let your discipline replace your excuses. Because excuses are how potential slowly dies without resistance. Let your silence replace your need to defend yourself. Because nothing unsettles shallow minds more than quiet certainty. The Stoic path is not dramatic. It is not loud. It does not beg to be seen. It is steady. It is composed. It is relentless. You do not need to announce your growth. Growth becomes obvious when your reactions change. When your boundaries sharpen. When your standards rise quietly and remain unmoved. You do not need to prove who you are. You only need to live it. Consistently. Quietly. and without apology. Because the moment you stop performing for approval, you regain something priceless. Freedom. Freedom from needing validation. Freedom from explaining yourself to those who do not listen. Freedom from shaping your life around opinions that vanish the moment you stop feeding them. The Stoics believe mastery begins internally, long before results appear externally. If this message resonated with you, it is not coincidence. It means something inside you is already waking up. Awareness always arrives before transformation. Clarity always precedes change. And once you see yourself clearly, you can never fully return to unconscious living. You begin to notice your reactions. You begin to question your habits. You begin to choose restraint where you once chose impulse. This is not weakness. This is power, refined. Power that does not shout. Power that does not chase. Power that does not crumble when ignored. If you value clarity over noise, discipline over fleeting motivation, truth over comfortable illusion, then you already understand what this path requires. Support this message by liking this video, so it reaches others who are tired of pretending, tired of reacting, tired of living someone else's version of life. Comment below with the one idea that stayed with you. Not for visibility, but because writing sharpens awareness, and awareness strengthens resolve. And subscribe to Stoic Life Lessons. If you seek more than inspiration, if you seek self-mastery, emotional discipline, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing who you are, the Stoics warn that an unexamined life weakens the soul. Not because life is cruel, but because unconscious living hands your power away piece by piece. You have begun examining yours. That alone sets you apart. So move forward. Not hurried. Not anxious. Not seeking permission. Stay grounded when others react. Stay disciplined when others drift. Stay steady when others collapse under emotion. Walk forward not as who you were taught to be, not as who fear shaped you into, but as who you are becoming. Deliberate, aware, and unshakably your own. This is not the end. This is the moment you stop living in shadow and begin standing fully in yourself. Like, comment, and subscribe for more videos like this.